Defense closing.
The prosecution built their case on a complete and total failure to do the bare minimum. They did not perform the investigation that Claire Walker deserved, nor the one that Morgan Walker was entitled to. Instead, their case relied on unanswered questions, untested evidence, and a hope that you would ignore the facts. Because they can't meet their burden unless you ignore the footprint, look past the fingerprint, discount the bias, write off the mental conditions, set aside the inconsistent statements, pardon the open windows, forgive the lack of investigation, and excuse the willful ignorance and arrogance of the lead detective. They can't meet their burden unless you ignore the facts. But unlike the government, we trust that you will do your job today. We trust that you will take all of these facts and apply them to the law. And once you do that, you will see that under no circumstances did the prosecution meet their burden beyond a reasonable doubt. Let's start with the prosecution's first witness, Riley Jasper Walker. Now, Riley may be Claire's stepfather, but Riley didn't come here to get justice for Claire. He came here for one reason, to get Morgan Walker convicted. Why would he do that? Well, one reason is greed. You see, Riley knows under their prenuptial agreement that Morgan gets convicted, they get 90% of Morgan's estate. And 90% of $7 million is a lot of money. So Riley has this financial gain, and Riley wants that money. But Riley slipped up. Riley told you what they're planning to do with the money. Riley's not even hiding it at this point. Riley told you a 6-month vacation around the world, because in Riley's own words, he's earned it. But it wasn't just greed. You see, Riley had his son's freedom to fight for, because Riley didn't just discover a murder, Riley covered one out. Look at the ransom note that was found at the house. It's asking for $228,000 in return for Claire Walker. You see the problem? It doesn't make sense. Why would a kidnapper leave this behind? Claire Walker wasn't taken from the property. There was no chance they were getting Claire back. Claire was killed. Claire was murdered and left in the basement of her own home. This is not a note that a kidnapper would leave behind. This is a note that someone looking to stage a kidnapping would leave behind. And you can tell that by looking at the grocery list that was also found in the home. This grocery list and this note, they have the same ink color. And worse than that, they have the exact same handwriting. Why is that? Because they have the same author from the desk of Riley Walker. Riley planted this ransom note because Riley knows that Aaron has anger problems. Riley knows Aaron was one of the last people with Claire Walker before her death. And Riley knows that as his father, he has to protect Aaron at all costs. Riley had a personal and financial incentive to testify against Morgan Walker here today, and the prosecution put him front and center. That bias cannot be ignored. We also cannot ignore the physical evidence in this case against Morgan Walker, or should I say the lack thereof. Because the truth is, the prosecution only gave you one piece of physical evidence against Morgan Walker. Only one, and it's touch DNA. And its exact name is the reason why it cannot be the basis for a conviction, but the prosecution doesn't care. They want you to believe it had to have come from a homicidal reason. This touch DNA had to come from an act of violence, but we know that's absurd. Detective Hernandez even admitted on the stand, parents hug their children, parents carry their children, but worst of all, They know that Morgan Walker carried Claire Walker's body out of the basement. They admitted this could account for the touch DNA. Prosecution is relying on DNA they know could be contaminated. They know could be explained by innocent explanations. They don't care. There's other evidence in this case as well we like to talk about. We have the flashlight in the living room. Now, this flashlight is important for two reasons. First, it has Claire Walker's blood on it. And Claire Walker died of a head wound consistent with being hit with a heavy object. So we have this flashlight. And what do police find on it? A fingerprint. A fingerprint that matches the one person that Riley Jasper Walker has been trying so hard to protect, Aaron Jasper. Now, we're not saying Aaron Jasper is the killer. We're not saying Aaron Jasper is guilty of anything. That's not our job. That's the job of prosecutors. But at the very least, they should have looked into this possibility. At the very least, they should have pursued all theories. But they didn't. They chose not to conduct a proper investigation, but you don't have to take my word for it. Take the words of the lead investigator, Detective Hernandez, who got on that stand and told you that the police work in this case was a complete and total failure to do the bare minimum, told you that standard procedure was not followed, and told you that the ineptitude of the New Orleans Police Department could have led to the contamination of evidence. Worse than all of that, worse than the botched investigation, Detective Hernandez simply ignored exonerating evidence. We have a footprint in the basement where Claire Walker's body is found that can't be matched to anyone in the house. We have open windows in this basement, a potential access point for anyone to break in. But these weren't dusted for fingerprints or checked for DNA. Why? Because when other officers asked Detective Hernandez if they could look into the possibility of break-in, they could just pursue what the evidence is showing, Detective Hernandez told them no. Detective Hernandez, he's confident. He's confident that he knows what he's talking about. He's confident that he's got the right person, and he's so confident that he's going to ignore the facts. And today on the stand, you saw a bit of that overconfidence. You saw a bit of that arrogance. When I asked him simple questions, yes or no, what did he do? He went on and on and on. He couldn't stop himself because he knows when directed with these simple questions, it pokes holes in his theory. It pokes holes in his case, and he doesn't like that. So he's going to explain his way out of it. He's going to try to talk his way out of any problem that comes his way with this case. He's going to ignore the facts because he wants you to ignore the facts. There was not a proper investigation done in this case. There was ignored evidence, and the evidence we do have doesn't point to Morgan Walker. Those are the facts. Let's see how they apply to the law. Because you see, anytime the government accuses someone of a crime, they have to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, that is the highest standard we have in our legal system. But we took on a burden as well. You see, we raised an affirmative defense where we had to prove by a preponderance of the evidence, which simply means it's more likely than not, that Morgan Walker could not understand the wrongfulness of his actions due to a mental condition. And we took on that burden. It may be lower than the prosecution's burden, but we took it on. We brought you the facts. We brought you Dr. Dixon. She told you about these mental conditions. She told you about the effects it has. She told you the symptoms. She told you the facts. Meaning, even if everything the prosecution says today is true, meaning if everything they theorize about Morgan Walker is right, under no circumstances could he have formed the required mindset to commit this crime. The prosecution told you. They theorized too much joy ended in too much rage. That's exactly right. It's too much rage. These are mental conditions. They cause impulsive behavior. They cause aggression. These aren't just your flashes of annoyance or your road rage you might see. These are medically diagnosed conditions by a psychiatrist that show impulsive, aggressive behavior. We took on a burden and we met it. We don't want you to ignore the facts. But regardless about how you feel about this defense, under no circumstances did the prosecution meet their case beyond a reasonable doubt. We have questions that went unanswered. We have evidence that went untested. And the evidence we do have is either inconclusive or contaminated. You didn't get the answers you needed today. But you deserve answers. You deserve more than the bare minimum. Claire Walker deserves more than the bare minimum. And Morgan Walker deserves more than the bare minimum. Tell them that. Tell them that they shouldn't have put Riley Jasper Walker on the stand knowing there were these clear incentives to testify against Morgan. Tell them that they should have at least pursued the possibility of Aaron Jasper being the culprit the second they found that fingerprint. Tell them they should have pursued all theories, followed all leads, tested all evidence, answered all questions. Tell them that they shouldn't have built their case on a complete and total failure to do the bare minimum. Tell them that by bringing back a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.